Hey guys, this is Kendall Terry, and this is plants, looking at plant forms, the first part of that. So here we've got a poorly drawn plant. This is my drawing, that's why I said poorly drawn. Plant, is the first we see that it's split into two main parts. It's split into the shoot and the root. The shoot, pretty much everything from surface up. The root, pretty much everything from surface down. And when we look at those, then there's certain characteristics of both that we need to identify. Looking first down here at the root, you have the primary root, which is what is connected to the shoot right here and goes down. And then you've got these lateral roots that's going to branch off from that and spread out to do its primary job of the root, which is to absorb water. And then you've down here at the bottom, the root apex. And this is where you're going to find what we'll talk about in a minute called meristem cells, where you'll get your primary growth of the root going down. When you go above the surface, there's a lot of different things to identify. Of course, you've got the stem that makes up the majority of the height of the plant. Then you've got what we call nodes. Nodes are places that the leaf will grow. Now, in this case, we're looking at a complex leaf, and we know that because it's got leaflets. These little leaflets in here. Tendrils are modified leaves that will help grab onto different things as it's growing. And here's another leaflet that's growing on this one. You would call this whole thing a leaf. So in this, you've got the blade, the edging, the vein that carries the water and sugar throughout the plant, and then the petiole, which is that starting point of the leaf. Going from node to node is a space called the internode. That makes sense. The internode, the space between the nodes. When you get to another leaf area here, you've got also what we call an axillary bud. Now, an axillary bud is there in case the primary up here, the shoot apex, gets damaged. If this shoot apex up here, this primary gets damaged, then the axillary bud will start to grow to replace that. So that one's been damaged, axillary bud will start that primary growth again. So it's got meristem cells and it's ready to grow if that primary one gets damaged. If the primary one is growing fine, then the axillary bud will be suppressed and it won't grow any. And then you've also got the flower, which is the angiosperm plants that we're going to primarily focus on in this unit. So we're talking about those meristem cells. I've got the two types that we're going to look at identified here. So in meristems, those are clumps of small cells with dense cytoplasm and proportionately large nuclei that act as stem cells do in animals. So when you hear about stem cells, and that's a hot topic in animals a lot, is stem cell research. These are cells that are unspecialized, that are able to produce all the other plants, or all the other cells throughout that organism, that complex organism. Meristems are the cells that do that in plants. Now, they're called meristems so instead of just stem cells, so you don't get confused with the stem of a plant and stem cells that do a particular job. So they call them meristems. There's two main places that are types of meristem cells. There's apical meristems. These are the ones that you see that are responsible for primary growth in the ends of the shoots and the roots. That's the top and the bottom, primary vertical growth. In lateral meristems, these are responsible for secondary growth that occurs to increase the diameter or girth of the shoots and the roots. So this is vertical or horizontal growth, meaning growth out, whereas the apical meristem is vertical growth up. The next thing we want to look at are the plant tissues. And there are meristems that will develop all three of these different types of tissues as that plant goes through primary and secondary growth. You've got dermal tissues, which is that outermost layer of the plant. Many times this will be covered in a cuticle or covering to protect it and to keep from water loss, stuff like this. There are some specialized dermal cells. Some are guard cells. These are surrounding the stomata, and they actually open and close. They look like this, and they'll open and close the stomata to allow air coming in and out of the leaf. Trichomes, which are on the stems and leaves, and it looks like, under a microscope, it looks like little hairs that stick out. And these little hairs will actually help. Some of them will produce toxins to keep herbivores from eating them. And others will help reduce, the majority of them, help reduce water loss. So it will actually trap the water vapor and condense it so that the water won't go off into wherever, but it'll stop water loss. And then you have root hairs. Root hairs are similar to trichomes on the stems and leaves, but these occur in the roots, and they actually increase surface area so that you can get good water absorption. Ground tissue, another type of plant tissue. Tissue layer responsible for storage, photosynthesis, secretion, support. It's really a lot of the inside material. So this is the outer covering of the plant. A lot of the space-filling stuff is ground tissue. And it does all kinds of different things. There's 3 different specialized cells we talk about. The parenchyma cells, these are the ones primarily responsible for photosynthesis and storage. The collincma cells, which are support. If you want to think about collincma cells, if you've ever eaten celery, the strings in celery are collincma cells. They're long, they provide support. And then you've got sclerenchyma cells. Sclerenchyma cells, a lot of times we think of them with strength. There's 2 different kinds. Fibers, which we use to make cotton, clothing and stuff like that. It's actually weaving fibers, so they add strength support. And sclerids. And the most common place you see sclerids, if you've ever eaten a pear and that grittiness inside the pear, those are sclerids. And those are usually in areas of ground tissue that just add support and structure to it. They're small, dense cells that do that. The third type of plant tissue is vascular tissue. Vascular tissue conducts water and nutrients. 2 types, xylem and phloem. We'll look at phloem in a minute. Xylem conducts water. These are dead cells. There's 2 types of xylem. There's vessels, which are fat cells, and tracheids, which are thin cells. Both of them have these pits, those little notches there, and those are areas that the cell wall is very thin or lacking altogether so that water passes through the sides very easily. And then there's also these pores that allow it to transport very quickly from one to the next. As water is conducted up from the roots to the leaves, much of that water will actually be evaporated out of the leaf through the stomata in a process called transpiration. And we'll actually do a lab in class on transpiration so you can see the effects of that. The other type of vascular tissue, phloem, this is food-conducting tissue. This is going to conduct your sugar from the leaf down to the other parts of the plant. It will also conduct hormones and other chemicals that the plant needs to pass from one to the next. These 2 types of phloem, sieve cells and sieve tube members. Sieve tube members are much more specialized than sieve cells. Sieve cells are just kind of these big cells that just allow this stuff to go through. Sieve tube members, though, have developed an association with a companion cell. And that companion cell will carry out metabolic functions that are important to the sieve tube member cell. So they actually work together to allow the plant to function. They are both made from the same parent cell. So the parent cell, as it splits into 2 cells, one of them will be the sieve tube member conducting that sugar. The other will be the companion cell that will sit right up next to it that will do all of the metabolic process. And they'll actually continue to have a lot of plasmodesmatas, which are openings to allow stuff to pass very quickly from one cell to the next, back and forth between those 2 cells. So the sieve tube members have got a specialization called the companion cell that helps it do all the things it needs to do.